Unlabeled leadership is a volunteer service. We appreciate our guests for their stewardship and remarkable stories. We also appreciate listeners like you who back the show with star reviews and contributions.
Gary DePaul with Unlabeled Leadership. Welcome to episode 152. Don Shuler is the champion for helping people. Here's a shout out to listeners from Vaud, Switzerland, and in the United States, Little Elm, Texas, Saratoga Springs, Utah, Wilmington, Vermont, and Tulsa, Oklahoma. With that, let's get started. Dawn is the CEO and founder of the Shuler Group, and she has thousands of hours of coaching and training executives and mid-level employees at several organizations by strengthening their leadership, systems, processes, and even how they train. She hosts the podcast When People Thrive, Companies Thrive with Don Shuler, which has more than 200 episodes. On her LinkedIn profile, there is an incredible testimony that I want to read to you. Here it is. Our sales team had their best sales month ever after training with the Shuler Group. Dawn has an uncanny ability to hear what's not being said and get straight to the heart of the matter. She can see the big picture and develop an easy-to-follow roadmap that allows everyone to succeed. She consistently brings more clarity and flow with her coaching. Dawn and her organization may be just what you need. Part 1. The Gift of Seeing What Others Cannot. In Episode 4, Judy Hale and the Brown Suit, we talk about a metaphor of a hallway with doors, and the doors represent opportunities. As you go through life, you have various opportunities appear in front of you, some that you see, some that you don't, some that you just are not aware of until someone points them out, and that's kind of how life is. When you look at a life and you look at what the person does, at first, everything might seem random, but there's a journey that has a logic to it. In this part, Dawn shares a little bit of her own journey and what she experiences, and it leads to a very interesting conversation. Here's Dawn.
As a former English teacher about 3 million years ago, it's probably not surprising that my life-changing sentence comes from a poem. It is one of my favorite poems because of this sentence. It's The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost.
Oh.
The end of the poem is, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
And you've lived your life from teaching English to what you're doing now.
Yes, it was not a straight line road, that's for sure. It was definitely the road less traveled.
Tell me a little bit about that journey.
Absolutely. It's a meandering path, so there's all these turns and twists and right turns and left turns. I went to college originally to be a lawyer. During my undergrad, I worked at the legal clinic because undergrad was also the same college where the law school was. I quickly found out I did not want to be a lawyer. It was not the life that I wanted. And then I had to make a decision. I was already getting a degree in English and in business administration. So I thought, well, I could teach English. I could do that. I taught English for 2 years after I graduated and soon found out that teaching 7th and 8th graders was not my cup of tea, especially in the low socioeconomic area where I had 7th graders who were pregnant. I had 7th and 8th graders who were in gangs. And the school district really didn't support the kids, the families, or the teachers. Left that, moved from Texas to Maryland, became an executive assistant at Johns Hopkins University until my first daughter was born. And then I did part-time web coding, straight HTML. I can code in HTML, which I don't know how many people out there can say that.
Not many people probably remember what HTML is or have heard of it.
That's true. It's a great metaphor, though, closing the tags. You want to bold something, you have the code for bold at the beginning, and where it ends, you have the code to end that bolding at the end. And It's kind of how I go through life. You begin something and you have to end it or complete it. I guess that's a better way to say it, complete it. I wanted to start my own consulting business, and I went from trying to figure out what kind of training and consulting business, and this is probably going on 25, 26 years ago. And I found something called virtual assistants. So I shifted gears yet again and went through a program to learn to be a virtual assistant. Within 3 years, I was chief operating officer of that virtual assistant training company. I was not just assisting clients, but I was managing their businesses, everything from hiring and firing staff to helping them create product launches, even sometimes helping them create the products and services themselves, marketing, the whole gamut. I went from that to business coaching for very small business owners and entrepreneurs. That was a tough road because, as Seth Godin says, most people who know they need a coach already have one. So trying to convince people that they should have a business coach was a little difficult. I come all around full circle to let me do training and consulting and for the corporate and nonprofit world. And in 2014, that is when the Shuler Group was born, alongside also the marriage between my husband, Mark, and me, of course. I became a Shuler, and then the Shuler Group came into an existence that same year. That's the short version, believe it or not, of my story.
Starting off thinking you're going into law to English, and that huge move from Texas to Maryland, HTML coding, all the way up to various roles of consulting, and COO of the company that you went to school for virtual assistants. It is amazing what you've done. And looking back, when you see the path less traveled that you went on, how do you see it? Is it a logical progression, or is it just it happened organically? How would you describe that?
Well, that's a very good question. Definitely organically. And the way that I operate my life, I call myself the perfect Libra. If you know the zodiac signs, it's scales, it's balance.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I really balance right brain versus left brain, yin versus yang. I make a lot of decisions intuitively, not instinctually, there is a difference, but intuitively, almost always ends up that the logic makes sense. My journey, while on paper does not look logical, when I look back, it does make very good sense. I got my degrees in English, communication, and business administration. So now if you look at it, I teach now. It just looks different. I'm not teaching 7th and 8th graders. I'm working with adults most of the times in some form of communication. I can see a piece of everything that I did that creates that bigger picture puzzle.
As you go down this journey, I'm sure that doors open, opportunities become visible to you. Some of them are because of circumstances. Some of them, I'm guessing, are ones that came from you, that you've generated rather than it just happening. I'm guessing that it's a mix of the two.
Yes, absolutely. I am of the belief system that keep yourself open because there are opportunities all around, and don't get boxed in by it has to look this way and it occurs in this timeline. And I'm telling myself that as well as talking to you and the listeners, because we can get these ideas of how it should look. And if we are so rigid, we can't see on the periphery that here's this other door opening. I work to be as open as I can. I take the next step forward and have faith that the next step after that one will appear.
In that process, I'm thinking about your consulting practice and your training. Part of what you do, here I am, I'm speculating again, but I think that you open doors or point out opportunities, especially when you're coaching mid-level or mid-sized business owners and employees, that you give them perspective and help them find their journey in a way that they were not expecting.
Yes, I believe that for those of us who are in consulting roles or coaching roles, that The gift that we have that then we can share with others is that ability to see things they cannot. If you have that landscape view and your client or your coachee or your mentee, whoever you're working with, doesn't have that same ability to see that and you share that with them, it opens their world. I absolutely believe that's what I do, and I think that's what other consultants do as well. That's why companies and organizations hire consultants and coaches, because they need someone that has that different skill set and ability to see things they cannot.
Part 2, be the champion of the people you work with. Regardless if you're in management or just part of a team, you can practice leadership. You can help lead people by doing small things like removing barriers, giving support, or even just encouraging someone in the work that they do. Sometimes you need to roll up your sleeves and step in and help out. Other times, it's just giving someone perspective that they don't have. In this remarkable story, Dawn shares about her daughter and what she experienced during the pandemic. That is, what her daughter experienced. Again, here's Dawn to share her story.
My younger daughter, her name is Anastasia, during the summers in between school and college and all of that, she worked at the boat rental in Montgomery County, Maryland. She worked herself up to assistant manager and manager of the boat rental. She loved it until about 2020 when COVID happened. As we know, most of the world shut down, especially anything indoors. The boat rental that Anastasia worked at was open. She had so many challenges because now their customer base was huge. They're always busy in the summer anyway, but with so much fewer options for people to do things, to be entertained, and they were going outside and doing what was available there, their patronage at the boat center, the boat rental, just increased phenomenally. And they didn't have enough staff to handle it. They've got more customers than normal. The world was scared. I mean, we still are. We still are dealing with a lot of the same issues we were dealing with 2 years ago. And so they weren't always as gracious and kind and patient. One particularly difficult weekend, because boat rental was open Saturdays and Sundays, she decided to take matters in her own hand. She ordered pizza on her own dime for everybody as a morale booster. The next day, Sunday, she stopped off and got donuts to bring in as a morale booster. And she's like, I know that this isn't going to solve the problem, but it's the only thing I feel like I can do, that I have control over, to do something to boost morale. Because the customers were not always as kind and gracious and patient as we would like them to be, she changed the shift schedule so that she was the one at the customer window the majority of the time. She felt that was her job, to protect her staff. She was 21 years old at the time. She's like, my little staff members, who are maybe 1 or 2 years younger than she, she knew her job as a leader was to protect them and to buffer them. They created signs to put out on these long lines that customers were lining up at the boat rental to help explain the process, to try to make their job a little bit easier and to help the customers understand what was going on. She did all of that on her own. And what impressed me and still impresses me to this day is that belief that her job was to protect her staff and employees. In a difficult situation, if needed, she would be the buffer.
I think that's a beautiful story, not only because of the story itself and what happened, but you're absolutely right. It encompasses much of what's involved in leadership. And that is not only removing barriers that interfere with how staff or people who work with you, that interfere with how they work, but also it's to protect the people that you work with. I think that's something that a lot of people don't learn immediately, if they learn it at all. Anastasia's like in her 20s. It's incredible when someone in her 20s is able to do that.
Definitely. She did such a good job. She has a very good work ethic. when the manager of the boat rental that also encompassed, I think, a second boat rental and another park in the systems was moving on. And even though he knew that Anastasia's life goal is in film, she's a sound mixer for films and documentaries, he still asked her if she wanted the job of managing the entire boat rental and this other park system because she had demonstrated such great leadership skills and, again, that great work ethic. And she was very flattered, but she turned it down because that was not her dream. But I think that says something about the effect that she had on the people around her, both up level and down her direct reports.
I love that. I'm thinking about in corporate America, and I spent many years working in companies where I've seen people in management do things as you described with Anastasia, but they don't get recognized. It's so difficult for people to realize what's going on. But the reason, as with your daughter, that these managers do what they did to protect their staff and to ensure that they have the best environment to work in is for their staff, and it's not for other people. If people recognize it outside of the team, great, but it's not the main driver. But it is something that's crucial to do, especially in environments where, like with COVID, or just in large organizations when it's so easy to get lost in the work.
Yes. I guess we could call it the consulting philosophy that we pass on to our clients is that leaders and managers are meant to be champions for their staff. That's their role.
Yeah.
That's why they exist. They may have other jobs that they have to do within their role as manager or leader, but it's also to be champions for their staff.
When someone's in management, it's so easy to get caught up in your work as an individual contributor that sometimes people forget that. They get lost in the work and they don't have that philosophy. And the ones who can maintain that, who continue to be champions and steward their people, are the ones we need in life.
I could say so much about all of that. The trends and why people are leaving and why they don't leave. And a lot of it goes back to, are they engaged? And are they engaged by their manager? Are they valued for what they bring to the table? Are their values in alignment with those of the company proving that they care about their well-being? There's so much. There's great stuff, great concepts. And with your podcast and our efforts, hopefully we're helping make a change in the way corporations, nonprofits, associations treat their people.
Right now, and I've been reading this more and more about some of the surveys that have been coming out, that a lot of people are looking for jobs that match what they've been doing in a hybrid workforce, where they've been working from home, they enjoy it. A lot of companies are requiring employees to come back to the office full-time or preferably hybrid if they give that option. Some of the larger companies, they're just giving up this hybrid approach. I think about that. And I also think about some of the executives I talk with who look at that and say, you know what, there's nothing we can do. If employees want to leave, they leave to find those telecommuting jobs or hybrid jobs or remote work, however you want to put it. But I'm thinking that if the manager of those employees did all the things that Anastasia did, then I think some of the people might end up saying, you know what, I prefer to work remote or in a hybrid, and I really want to, but it's not worth leaving because I have such a great manager. I thrive in that environment. People give in too easily to, oh, that's just the way things are. They're going to leave anyway if they don't get the remote job.
You're right. There are so many factors. And Gallup, of course, is the king of the surveys. In a recent article, they said that it takes more than a 20% pay raise to lure most employees away from a manager who engages them, and next to nothing to poach the most of the disengaged workers. If they're not engaged, it could be anything. Hey, I get a better cell phone reimbursement. It could be anything. But if they're engaged by their managers, then it takes a lot more to get them to leave, to your point.
Part 3, we are all in supporting roles and our stars. In this part, Dawn talks about EQ, or emotional intelligence, or emotional quotient, then shares a metaphor that's powerful and gives some advice. She explains a little bit about EQ, but if you want to learn more about EQ, go to episode 26 where Peter Popovich explains what emotional intelligence means. Here's Dawn.
One of the concepts we train, teach, and consult on is emotional intelligence. That idea that you're self-aware, you can then manage yourself. You are socially aware, meaning you're aware of other people and how they are different from you, and you can manage your relationships and communications with those people with that understanding that they are different from you. A tool that we use to help foster that social awareness, that idea that people are different from you, comes from the book, The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. In the beginning of the book, he talks about this concept that we are walking down the street. We are the director, the writer, producer, the editor, the main star of our movie, and everyone else around us is supporting cast, whether they're important supporting cast or just extras in our movie. Take that a step further and realize everyone else is the writer, producer, director, editor, main star of their movie, and you are simply a supporting cast member in their movie. So when you start to look at the world, that it does not all revolve around you, and that everybody else are these walking individual movies, you start to realize and expand that other people are different from you. If you're literally walking down the street and somebody makes a weird face, you might think, oh my gosh, what did I do? That must be directed toward me. Am I wearing something weird? And when in reality, the person might have been talking on the Bluetooth and somebody said something on the other end. Of course, you can't hear because they're talking to somebody on Bluetooth.
Yeah.
And they're making some grimace or noise because of that, but it has nothing to do with you. You can start to look at the world as they've got their own movie going on. And so in their movie, that might explain why they responded this way, and that it's not necessarily directed toward me personally. Does that make sense, Gary?
That makes perfect sense. A great example is just the difference between observing and interpreting. In the illustration you just gave, someone makes a face. In your mind, you think there's something wrong with me, I'm doing something different, or you might say that person is mad at me because for whatever reason. And all that stuff that I just described were stories that were made up in the head that had nothing to do with the observation of person made a face. We attribute these stories, and then our emotional part reacts not because of the observation, someone made a face, but it's a reaction to the stories we tell almost spontaneously in our heads about what's going on. Our brains just don't like unanswered or unexplained situations. Yeah, the more people realize the difference between what they see, the behaviors they observe, and the stories they tell in their heads can help give people the opportunity to think different and not make these huge leaps to stories that are negative and that cause a lot of emotional distress because of those stories that may or may not be true.
Exactly.
I'm thinking that when you're working with your clients, with your trainees, or your learners, it might be a better way of saying it, that it's helping them with the self-awareness part of themselves, but of the people around them and what they may be going through, and be able to interpret things a little bit differently or more openly than they normally would.
Absolutely. It's fostering greater understanding. We say that we train and consult in communication, and that is such a broad concept, and it covers so much. How we describe functional communication is forward motion, because you're communicating for a reason, whether in the workplace it's to get a project done or clarify something, whatever it is, it's to move something forward. Personally, if you're connecting with your partner and you're communicating, it's forward motion. who's in charge of cooking dinner tonight as an easy, off the top of my head example, but it's forward motion. That is what functional communication is. And there are a whole lot of reasons why communication breaks down. I believe the first step is self-awareness, and then the second step is greater understanding of others.
My thanks to Dawn Shuler. If you'd like to learn more about Dawn, go to the show notes. And if you have a question or comment, go to unlabelleadership.com, click the message icon, and leave a voicemail message for up to 1 minute. I'd like to thank those who donate to the show. Your contributions makes a difference because this is an all-volunteer service. Thank you for listening. This is Gary DePaul. Until next time, lead on.